Do you think you're bad at math? It might not be your fault. Dyscalculia is a learning difference that affects everything from basic arithmetic to complex problem solving. Welcome to the Water Prairie Chronicles, a podcast created to encourage and support parents of special needs children. I'm Tonya and I'm glad you're here. Welcome back to the Water Prairie Chronicles. We appreciate you joining us today, and I wanted to introduce you to someone that I just met this week. Actually just met today officially, but we've been in touch for the last week because we're in a mutual group on Facebook. And my guest is Michelle Steiner. She lives with an invisible disability, and we're going to get into that today. But she also is a published author. She has her own blog called Michelle's Mission, and we'll give you some context for that later. She's a photographer. She works as a paraeducator in a school with students with disabilities, so she knows what we're doing with Water Prairie. And she lives in Pennsylvania. And I'm going to ask Michelle to give us a little more detail about who she is, but that's kind of a brief overview there. So Michelle, welcome to Water Prairie.
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me, Tonya. I appreciate that.
Sure. Can you give us a little bit more about who you really are?
Sure. Well, my name is Michelle Steiner, and I live in Pennsylvania, and I have a learning disability. In math, I have dyscalculia, and that is the math disability.
Michelle, I'm going to explain what we're doing here. For those that are listening, if you've been with us for season 1, you heard us doing a 10-question speed round at the end of each interview. And this year we're adding, instead of that, we're starting out with doing a little game called Two Truths and a Lie. And so I'm asking each guest to share 2 truths about themselves. It can be any fact, little known facts are even better, because then people who know you may not know which ones are true. And then to share 1 fact that's actually an untruth. So can you think of 3 things that you can share with our audience and let them try to guess what it is? And those that are listening, we'll post these on Twitter and Instagram for the next week, but then we'll give you the answer in a week so you can check back and see if you actually guessed the right answer or not.
Sure. Okay. One of the things, I have a 3 stories coming out in an anthology. That should be out soon. I just got the email that'll be published. I really haven't done a whole lot of announcing for that because I'm not even sure of the title or what's going to happen with that. Another thing that's kind of a fun fact about me is we're going to Canada over the summer just to have a nice long vacation. And the third thing that is about me is I have a thing for butterflies. And we definitely had that chance to have butterfly kits, and that's one of the things we love to do over the summer. So hopefully we'll have some other butterflies this year.
Oh, great! All right, so I don't know which of these are going to be true, but I'm going to have to add my guess to it as well. Thank you for sharing that with us, Michelle. We will have to see what we can guess on this one. So today we're going to be talking about specifically the learning disabilities that you've had, I'm sure, diagnosed at different times of your life, because a lot of times these are discovered as a child gets older. But let's go back, and you mentioned them already, but specifically, what are the learning disabilities that you do work with?
Sure. I have dyscalculia or dyscalculia, depending on how you pronounce it, and that's the math disability. So somebody that has a really difficult understanding with math, how numbers work. I don't reverse numbers or letters, but I just don't understand a lot of how that works. And some of this does go over into other areas as well. So it's kind of tough to tell which what I have. I also have limited hand dexterity in both of my hands, and my handwriting is not very neat. And it's also hard for me to do things such as open up locks. It can be really hard for me to use a manual can opener. And when I was in school, we just always thought, oh, bad handwriting, learning disability, people read what I said. And then when I got diagnosed with the hand dexterity, it really opened up like, oh, well, maybe this is part of the reason that I struggle with that, because they just didn't diagnose or name that. And then I also have visual perception difficulties. And what that is, it's not in my eyes, so glasses aren't going to really do very much. But that also affects my eye-hand coordination, and I'm not able to drive. And I'm definitely not a competitive sport person. I like group exercise or individual, non-competitive ones. So, when I was a kid, everybody thought, well, you're just uncoordinated. That's the learning disability with the dyscalculia. And then I look at dyscalculia, and there's so much with that too, with confusing the right with the left and not knowing where your body is in space. So it's kind of hard to tell sometimes, what area is that really responsible for?
Right. So when were you first diagnosed with dyscalculia? And I've always been saying that wrong because I've never heard it said before. I've just seen it written. And I'll put the word on the screen for those that are watching YouTube. But if you're listening to this, it looks like dyscal, but then I always thought it was cula, but there is an IA at the end. So I guess you hear the IA on that too. So.
Right. When I was young, I was first diagnosed, it was just, back in the 80s, it was just considered an umbrella term of learning disability. My mom and dad, we all, my teachers knew I wasn't going to be a mathematician. We knew that it was pretty strong with that. And I had an evaluation as an adult to receive services, and they put math handicap. It's still really not like officially calling it that, but that is what people will call someone that has a math disability now. They're more specific. Right. And I think that was, I like that it's a little more specific, because I can remember when I was in school, everybody would, a lot would struggle with reading, or they would have dyslexia or something like that. And I would get lumped together with the peers in the learning support room. Yep. All of them struggled with reading things, and I struggled with math. So it was really hard to find my identity with that.
Before we go too deep in this, I want to clarify a few things. So we've talked about the dyscalculia, and I'm going to say that slowly so I don't mess it up. Then the hand dexterity. So the hand dexterity and the visual perception, do you think those two of those go together, or do you think they are separate?
I think they go together, because it's just how my brain processes the information, and just it's just how my brain works and what I'm putting out there. And it's frustrating because I know, especially as a young child, I always loved writing and reading, and people couldn't read my handwriting. And sadly, a lot of people judged my character based upon my handwriting. I even had staff that would say, well, why don't you, if you really wanted to, you could, I can't read your writing, and this looks really bad. I even had one that put a W on my report card indicating weakness after I had the diagnosis. So I never thought that was exactly fair on my part. I had a peer that told me, well, if you want to be a writer, you have to be neat. And I had another teacher that's told me, well, judging by your handwriting, I can probably see what your room looks like at home. Now, I didn't have a very neat room, but that had nothing to do with, making all those assumptions and those judgments. And what really helped was whenever we started teaching me how to type, and that was, I believe, in 10th grade. We teach it younger now, and I always encourage the students I work with, typing's a good thing. That's, make sure you're paying attention.
But now typing, though, because of the hand dexterity, was that,
yes.
Did that help, or was that hard to learn?
It was hard to learn. Most students, when I was in school, they take one semester of typing, and they're great. Right. I took a full year of it. And it was still tough. just to be able to learn how to do that. And it was frustrating. I never got when they made those pictures of different things.
Oh, right, right. I remember
Yeah,
that.
I still don't think I could do that, but once I got, I knew what I was doing. People could read my reports. People could read what I
Right.
was saying, and that it was worth it. So if I make a mistake here and there, I try to just give myself that grace for that. I mean, thankfully there's technology that can help with things like that as well. So that was a really key thing. And I think that the vision, and it's just amazing though, we didn't even find out about that until I was older. And then things just started to make sense. Like, oh, this is why not only my handwriting is horrible, but if I'm holding something in my hand, it just falls out sometimes. Or this is why I can't have my hands work the way that they want to. And that why certain things, if I was in gym class, I couldn't kick the ball that's what the other part, but I mean, I couldn't catch it. I wanted to, I knew I had the effort into it, but I just wasn't able to do it. And then with the visual perception, that can also be something, I'm not able to drive. And once again, my parents knew driving was going to be a challenge with having all this. And so they decided we were going to wait a year. And before we got in to do any lessons or anything like that, my mom and dad had me go and mow the field. We lived out in the country. And instead of making really nice, smooth lines, I ended up making circles that look like crop circles. So that mystery is solved. we know where they come from. And I also remember we were going up our long driveway, and my mom, thank God she was in the car with me, and we would have crashed into the garage.
Oh,
And
wow.
my mom
Yeah.
and dad knew that this might be a good idea to get a driver's license evaluation at a rehabilitation hospital.
Right.
And that was paid for by Office of Vocational Rehab. And I passed everything else on the test. Vision was good. I had enough sense of what to do if the car broke down. I knew what to expect, the responsibilities of a car. But when they did this visual perception test, I didn't pass. And my mom prayed that day that it just would be what God's will was. And this is what it was. And I was really accepting of it because I knew that there was bus services. There was ways I could do this.
In school, we talked a little bit about that you did use special ed services when you were in school. So you were in school in the 80s. Did you have an IEP at that time, or what was
Yes.
what was it called, an IEP?
Yes, it was called an individual education plan.
Okay.
I was really lucky to have the services that I did and to have the teachers that were able to identify it. I wasn't one of the students that could mask having a disability. It stuck out like a sore thumb.
Did you spend some time in the resource room and some time in a regular mainstream room, or how was your day? Let's
Right.
let's look at elementary school first.
Okay. Well, initially I was in kindergarten and I had the diagnosis, and I had to repeat kindergarten in a new school in our district the following year. And it was a very interesting placement. I would begin my day in a first grade classroom, sort of like a homeroom. We didn't have a lot of services set up for a student that was repeating kindergarten for that. And then I would go to learning support in the morning, where we would work on reading and writing and all the academics that I needed and the help that I had. And then I would go back and eat lunch with my first grade peers. And then it would be kindergarten in the afternoon. And then I would go home. It was really good though, because I got those skills a lot of those skills that I needed.
Right.
And as I progressed through school, I was able to start being in regular ed classes with my peers for science, social studies, and some reading. And I had supports though. I would go, when I had a test, I would go in the learning support classroom and I would have the test read to me and I would get extended test time. It was hard though because of the size of our school. It was I live in a very small town, had a very small school district.
Yep.
You couldn't hide. There was just no room to blend in. And that was really hard because a lot of my peers, they knew I went to the learning support, and the bullying started really early and the rejection
I wondered
from my
about that.
peers. Yeah. And it just, that was tough because all I wanted to do as a young child was just be like my friends and be
Yeah.
able to learn and make my parents proud, which they've always been proud of me. But I just wanted to learn like every other student. I didn't want to have the individual education plan. I didn't want to have the
Right.
special classes. I didn't want to feel like I was any different than my peers. So that was really hard during those elementary school years.
Did you go to middle school with the same peers that you were in elementary school with?
Yes, and then we had peers that went to the different school districts, were in the class, and they all came to middle school. So it was a
Okay.
mixture.
So you're able to meet some new kids there
Yes,
then.
but I soon had the same difficulties that I had, and that got a lot worse as I progressed throughout school. Academic wise, for everything except for math and gym class, it got a lot easier.
Did you have modifications in your gym class?
I had some classes where I was separate, where we did have like adaptive, but it wasn't like we do now where you have an actual class. It was me and the teacher and maybe like one other student. But in fact, I can still remember by the time I was in high school, I really didn't want to do that. And I can still, I mean, I would blink every time the volleyball would come at me, and we had some girls in that class that they played for blood. And I can remember it took the gym teacher 4 years, and then finally she goes, "Do you want to go ride the exercise bike or walk?" I'm like, "Yeah, definitely." And I love doing that. And that I'm like, if we would have figured this out when I was in ninth grade, that would have made it a lot easier. But I was glad that year.
Wait, and you're bringing into the conversation more than just your own personal experiences because of your career path too, and working with children with disabilities. So you're seeing it from both sides, from the teacher
Yep.
side of it as well as the being the child yourself. I'm sure
Exactly.
you're a phenomenal teacher,
Oh, well, thank
working with the
you.
kids. Well, to be
Yeah.
able to connect with them on a personal level, you're bringing in, you're able to think from their point of view, where the next person may not be able to do that as easily.
Exactly, because I will have students that come in, and it's almost like listening to a recording of myself at that age. Um, I'll have students that'll say, "I hate my disability." I'm like, "Well, okay, I've been there. I understand what that's like." And they don't want to have an IEP. Well, I've been there too. I can, I kind of go, I'm able to go in and show them how to advocate for themselves. We'll have students that'll come in saying, "I'm really struggling in this class, but I'm afraid to ask the teacher for help." And most of the staff I work with are wonderful. They're phenomenal with wanting to help and wanting to do stuff. But we're not mind readers. If we don't have a way of knowing what's going on, we can't really help them. So I'll go and I'll tell them, "Okay, this is how we advocate for stuff. Go up and talk to somebody. The nice way to do it, even when you're upset and scared and anxious, and that's sometimes that's really neat to be able to go in there because I understand where they're coming from. I've been that scared kid that didn't want to go up and ask for help, but really needed to be able to ask for that. It's almost like I've come full circle when I get to go back and I get to now help some students to be able to do that.
Right.
It's so rewarding for me.
With Dyscalculia, so you don't have reversals with the numbers. It's the
No.
processing itself. Is
The
that correct?
processing itself. And
Okay.
even a lot of people will say, "Well, what about using a calculator?" And that always comes up on my list of accommodations. And I would certainly say that definitely something that can be of some use, but it's very limited for me because my problem isn't I can't put the numbers in. It's I just don't understand the process of how they work. I get lost in a lot of the steps on really complicated things. I don't. I can still remember not being able to remember all my facts for addition, subtraction, multiplication. I know some of them, but it's always interesting if I'll get someone that'll just come up in the hall and ask me a random math fact. I've had that before, and I'm like, I don't know, and I'm okay with that. I mean, that's just something that I just can't do that. And then another really thing that a lot of people would really be surprised with having it is I can't read the face of an analog clock. It makes, I mean, I know there's numbers, I know there's the big hand, I know there's the little hand, and I know there's lines. I can see those, but it just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And I found out that's a pretty common thing with someone that has a math disability. I have friends that say, I can't read the clock either. So you have a digital watch. And I think a lot of what does help is if you can visualize it. That's a big thing. Like I am great. Well, not 100% great, but if you would give me $20 and have me go to the store, I can have a way of budgeting for that. I mean, it still may be a surprise when I go there, but I get an idea because I can see the dollars going. I can see the quarters, or I can see that. Mm-hmm. But if you give me a debit card, I don't have a whole lot of a concrete. I mean, because it's more abstract. So sometimes you can see that. And also, queuing or clearing up a lot of myths. Because I remember when we did fractions, I always thought that you'd see the little number on something and you would think that was bigger, or you see the big number and the teacher would say, oh, here I go messing that up. And the teacher would say, oh, well, that pie, you want you must not be hungry. And I meant, and nobody ever explained that to me, and I couldn't see it. So that was a hard thing. And I think also knowing when somebody is struggling and using that scaffolding to go forward and to go back when they're struggling and say, okay, where are you at?
You mentioned earlier that was when the bullies started.
Yes.
Now that was elementary school when you were talking about that. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. I quickly, part of it was too, I was an only child, so I've had a lot of adult interaction. And I got to school and I was like, oh, okay, I have peers here. How do I interact? I had like a little more of an advanced vocabulary. So that was hard to be able to relate with that. My brother didn't come along until I was 13. But then I soon became the dumb kid, or I became the outcast, or I wasn't considered a valuable member of the class. And I had a hard time. How do I identify? How do I fit in? Socialize with peers. I mean, when I mainly had a lot of time with adults, and just wasn't really getting a lot of support from my peers and what I was good at. And then, of course, I'm in gym class, and you blink every time a ball hits, it comes to you. Then people kind of were pretty mean about that too, and just weren't always very kind about that. So I kind of learned, how to be by myself, and a lot of that, or how to just be able to sit there with a book and be, to be happy with that. So that was really and I think in those early years, it was, I just wanted to have a friend, like, a best friend. Mm-hmm. And I can remember that I would hear all these narratives of how to handle bullies. Like there was always you would go up to the bully and say, can't we be friends? And that would work out wonderful. Well, I went up to, I think, one of the most popular girls in elementary school, and I said, well, can't we be friends? And she told me no. I'm like, oh, I never saw that on TV. Or you would get the students that would, everybody, all the other kids in the class would go and confront the bully and the bully
Oh,
would
right,
change his
right.
ways, or they would all support
Yep.
him. Well, a lot of times that rarely happened, and a lot of times I had to, stand alone with that. A lot of what happened though is I went through school. I was still getting picked on, and it was harder because the groups became more defined. So we had people that were into this, or people that were friends with that,
Right.
and a lot of people that I may have had a couple friendships with in elementary school that I managed to, they didn't want to hang out with me because I wasn't going to make them popular, or they didn't want to be seen with me, and I held on to a lot of those relationships that I probably should have, just been like, okay, don't do that kind of stuff, because I thought, well, no one else is
Right.
going to like me. I did end up, though, finding students in a neighboring school district that were involved with an art program. And these kids didn't know who I was. And I did come out and say I had a disability. And I think I had problems with one person, one or two. There's always one. But for the most part, they were very kind, very accepting. I was able to shed that image of having the screw up or the dumb one. And I had acceptance. And that just gave me a lot more confidence. And I even developed friendships outside of that in other groups with some peers that were just a few years older than I was. They were already out of school. And I was able to, I'm still friends with them. And that was another writing group that we were involved with. And that just gave me that confidence. And I'm so glad that I made that, that leap to go and see what else was out there.
So it sounds like we'll get into some advice in just a minute, but it sounds like maybe parents helping to help their child find a group somewhere along where their interests are may help through that. Because I'm thinking in middle school, especially, you had mentioned how I think when you first mentioned the bullies, and then it got worse. Middle school is tough for any kid. That everyone's insecure, everyone's trying to figure out who they are, and so as you say, there's if you can make them more popular, then they're going to be your friend. If not, then probably not. But I don't know if I've ever talked to anyone who did not have some type of bully type situation in middle school. So during those years would be a good time maybe to start really helping your child find some type of program, or just hangout group or something that's a similar interest
Right.
with their child. So I'm glad you're able to find that, because not everyone does stumble on that until after being out of high school. Did you continue with school? What did you do after high
I
school?
did. I was able to, I went to college. Now, I always knew I wanted to go to school, but I didn't know if I could do it. And I had some staff that didn't think I could do it as well. I can remember a learning support teacher telling me, with your math, I don't think you could handle going on to college. So why don't we put you in vocational training? But nothing interested me. They didn't have an
Right.
early childhood program. And I can remember I had a student teacher that told me, you can go to college. And she started to tell me there were students with disabilities. And I was like, oh, okay. So that was an eye opener. And sometimes that's the voice that I heard. When I got evaluated for a learning disability, because I was connected with Office for Vocational Rehabilitation, and they were like, the psychiatrist told me that he didn't think I could go beyond community college. And when I got into the college that had the disability accommodations, I was also told my job choices were going to be limited. And once again, I had that stigma from my peers that they were like, you're getting an unfair advantage, and why are
Oh,
you
yeah.
using this, and you're putting yourself in a box. And I thought, well, okay, I'm not going to use it. That was not a good choice for me. My grades really plummeted because of that. I was really struggling, and the same
Right.
people that told me that I shouldn't be using them were the ones telling me I could do better. And it was really difficult. And I can remember I was in a class and I was really struggling, and the professor, I was talking with her, and she said, why don't we at least try to get you some extended test time?
Right.
And I started getting extended test time. and I was able to, pass her class. I didn't do well in it, but I passed it, and I was able to get my associates in early childhood. And I moved out on my own. I worked in some centers, subbing, had some part-time jobs, and I
Nice.
just always wanted more for myself, though. And I found a
Yeah.
program at university that I really liked and had the least amount of math, least amount of science
Right. I
possible.
was thinking, looking for those
Yeah.
things. Yep.
And we did a philosophy-based math course
Okay.
because we knew that was going to be a real struggle. And I also embraced accommodations at that point. I went in and I got the note taker. I did the extended test time. I did the tutoring.
Yep.
And most importantly, I advocated for myself. I would go up and introduce myself to a new professor at the end of class, saying these are the services I'll need. And mostly it worked out. Had one or two that might have had some issues in their classes, but for the most part, it was just really neat. I made Dean's List one semester,
Nice.
and I was able to, my grades were a lot better, and I still had the stigma, but I didn't really care at that point. I think once I went to community college, and I thought it's okay if I struggle in a class, or it's okay if I don't have the perfect grades, or it's okay if somebody doesn't exactly agree that I'm getting extended test time or tutoring, that's fair. As long as I knew I was trying my best, that's what mattered. And I was able to get the bachelor's degree. And despite everybody telling me I couldn't do that. And so that was my experience with school.
I've kept you for quite a bit here now, but I did want to have you tell our listeners a little bit about your blog and your photography.
Sure.
So tell us what that is, where they can find it, and what
Sure.
types of content you have.
Sure. Writing has always been a passion of mine. I can remember I had a friend, I was in a writer's group, and she told me, you really should write about your story. And I said, I don't know if I want to write about my learning disability. I just kind of want to pretend like that doesn't exist. And I think I wrote some really bad poetry and some other stuff that is kind of cringeworthy at this point. But I can remember I took her advice and I wrote my first article about having limited hand dexterity, and it got published. And I can remember just feeling just connected with other people, because people would be like, oh, that's my story, and I had that, and that led to more articles. And I started a blog called michellesmission.blog, and I write a lot of disability articles and just what that's like with having a disability. And I also put some of my photography on there of some of the flowers and other things that I have in place. So nice. Yeah, and then that's very rewarding for me, and it's just been the most healing thing is writing about it, and just being able to connect and to be able to help other people that have disabilities.
Excellent. I took a peek at it, and those that are listening, you may want to check it out. She's got some fantastic photography on there, and I skimmed through a couple of your articles, and you're very, very gifted writer. I enjoyed reading what I saw on there. So if our listeners have any questions after listening to this that they want to ask you about, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
They can find me on Facebook. I'm on there as well. I can give you the link for that.
I can put that in the show notes.
And I'm also on Instagram, and they can contact me on my blog as well.
Okay, so we'll put, those that are listening, or if you're watching on YouTube, we'll put the links in the show notes or the description, so you'll see that. And as always, it'll be on the webpage too for it.
Thank you.
Well, Michelle, thank you. I appreciate you taking the time to share your experiences with us. I know we're kind of all over the place, but I really enjoyed talking with you, and there were so many different interesting areas to dig into. So thank you so much for being on today.
Oh, thank you so much, Tonya. It's been a pleasure.
right, and those that are listening, remember to go and take your guess of whether you think her truths were true or her lie was a lie, which one it was, and we'll post the answer to that in a week.
This podcast is made possible by support from our listeners. If you want to help offset the cost of producing the Water Prairie Chronicles, become a supporter at buymeacoffee.com/waterprairie.
You've been listening to the Water Prairie Chronicles, a podcast created to encourage and support parents of special needs children. If you found value in this episode, hit the like button and subscribe so you don't miss future episodes of the podcast. I'm glad you were able to join us today, and I hope to see you back next week for another episode of the Water Prairie Chronicles.